We are now counting down the minutes before Trump's tariffs against Canada and Mexico kick in. At 25% on almost all goods and 10% on energy. Ottawa saying it is ready to hit back with counter tariffs. While here in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford has also long promised a strong counter response to Trump's threats. Queen's Park reporter Lorenda Redicop has more.
Premier Doug Ford spoke at a mining conference in Toronto. A main topic, the looming deadline from the U.S. on tariffs, as he took reporter questions for the first time since his election win.
If they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face.
He says he'd like every other province to do the same.
They rely on our energy. They need to feel the pain. They want to come at us hard, we're going to come back twice as hard.
He acknowledges it's the federal government leading Canada's response, but supports hitting back with equal counter tariffs, removing U.S. alcohol from LCBO shelves, ensuring $30 billion in procurement deals don't go to U.S. companies, and killing a deal with Starlink to provide internet in rural areas.
We're going to cancel Starlinks right away from Elon Musk. Not that $100 million makes a difference for them, but it's principle.
Later, Ford went on a U.S. network with another counter-tariff promise.
I will stop shipments going into the U.S. for nickel. It will shut down manufacturing because 50% of the nickel you use is coming out of Ontario. The market is going to go downhill faster than the American bobsled team. It's going to be an absolute disaster for both countries.
Ford also predicts auto plants on both sides of the border could shut down within 5 days after tariffs are added, with parts traveling back and forth multiple times. In Windsor, it's left auto workers worried and uncertain.
Could throw us into a layoff. It could, the economy could crash. If the economy crashes, you know darn well, big ticket items like autos are the first on the chopping list.
It's almost like they're shooting themselves in the foot as well. What is truly a Canadian automobile versus what is truly an American automobile? They're so intertwined, you can't tell them apart anymore.
Premier Ford also wants more people buying made in Canada goods, encouraging store owners to help.
Every retail store, when you go look at the shelf talker, it has the price. We need to see a Canadian flag on that price.
He says first he's asking politely, but that he could legislate this. It's unclear, though, if legislation would stick. A court intervened after Ford required gas stations to display an anti-carbon tax message during his first term. Lorenda Redicop, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, Canadian businesses have been dealing with this threat of tariffs for weeks now. Chris Glover has more on how local businesses are preparing.
The packaging line is in full swing at Alpha Poly's manufacturing plant in Brampton, but the CEO says so too is anxiety over U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods.
Well, honestly, we're nervous. There's a lot of uncertainties. We're up to the last hours of trying to figure out what's going to happen.
He says 10% of his product goes directly to the States. Already, they've halted marketing there and stopped all purchasing from American suppliers.
We need to mitigate our costs to ensure that we can be competitive.
U.S. products are also being yanked off the bar.
It means watching labels.
And the menu at the Madison in Toronto.
Just to make a stance, we're small, but at least we believe that as a Canadian, we need to band together now as Canadians and use what we have in our own country, and we have lots of stuff.
Looking over the menu, he says up to 10% of their overall product is American.
Weird things like jalapenos on a nacho. Like, you have to sort of go through and see where they're coming from.
The director of operations knows removing all that and sourcing Canadian products instead will cost a bit of money up front.
We can't be bullied by someone like this. This person, Trump is a disaster, and he's a nightmare for Canada, and he's threatening our sovereignty, and he can't do that.
But for other local businesses, the U.S. can't be avoided. Roughly 80% of Flow Beverage Corporation's Canadian product is sold in the States. All their packaging is currently done in Aurora, Ontario. But they do have a spring already operating in Virginia, and therefore a backup plan. They could retool and set up shop there in the States, so product wouldn't have to cross the border. But that would take time and money.
A bit of a pain, to say the least, but it also has a economic cost to it, which we would love to avoid at all cost.
Mm-hmm. And have you calculated what that economic cost might be to you and your business?
It's in the millions of dollars. Okay. It's not a small amount of money.
Just one example of the potential pain Canadian businesses may be forced to deal with, given the flow of the new U.S. administration. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
The U.S. is pausing military aid to Ukraine. A White House official confirming that tonight. President Trump's decision coming after a contentious meeting between him and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky last week. The fallout of that fiery meeting continuing to reverberate. Hundreds of Ukrainians and their supporters gathered in downtown Toronto tonight, demanding the U.S. support Ukraine in its war with Russia. Dale Manukduk has this story.
Stop Russia, save Ukraine! Stop Russia, save Ukraine!
Hundreds gathered at Yonge and Dundas streets to express their disapproval of U.S. President Donald Trump and their unwavering support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
He was really treated poorly. I think they really berated him, belittled him.
He's a self-proclaimed businessman. He wants power. He wants the best out of every single deal. And I mean, we were willing to give them the minerals for protection, but he can't even do that.
Last week, the two met in the Oval Office, President Trump trying to broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, where the U.S. would get access to critical minerals without providing a security guarantee. The meeting went off the rails.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
In recent weeks, Trump has called Zelensky a dictator and suggested Ukrainians started the war.
You know, the current administration is spreading this Russian propaganda, and we just are really sad that it reaches the Washington, and all this Russian propaganda are being kind of taken like the main source of information instead of doing some fact checking.
Stand with Ukraine! Stand with Ukraine!
It's something that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reaffirmed over the weekend while in Europe, meeting with Zelensky and other NATO allies.
We're going to continue to be there to support Ukraine as necessary with whatever it takes for as long as it takes.
What we want is like a fair and lasting peace with security guarantees, because as we know, Russia will invade in a year or 5 years or whatever. They already broken 25 ceasefires.
It's been just over 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. More than 40,000 civilians have been injured or killed, according to the UN Human Rights Office. Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Toronto.
For-profit plasma donation centres continue to open in Ontario despite a province-wide ban. While Canadian Blood Services is technically still allowed to open these clinics where people are paid for donating plasma, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union held a rally today calling them unethical. Alicia Song reports.
Not for sale! Not for sale!
Blood service workers and a Doug Ford Dracula are rallying outside of a private clinic where people can get paid up to $50 to donate their plasma.
Do we believe that we should exploit human beings to sell parts of their body? I mean, that's fundamental. It's a principle. And we have not crossed that line. We don't need to cross that line. We shouldn't cross that line.
Getting paid for your plasma is a banned practice in Ontario. So why are 5 of these centres set to open this year? Let's look at the legislation. Ontario, BC, and Quebec do not allow payments to blood and plasma donors through each province's Voluntary Blood Donations Act. But Canadian Blood Services is actually exempt from that. And they've since partnered up with Spanish company Grifols, working as agents in opening these clinics in Hamilton, Cambridge, North York, Etobicoke, and here in Whitby. It's still Canadian Blood Services handling and distributing the blood and plasma.
What the Ford government is doing right now is using a loophole in the Voluntary Blood Donations Act in order to allow for the sale of plasma in centers like this.
The province says it's about addressing a shortage in blood products and, quote, the Ministry of Health will continue to monitor the decisions of Canadian Blood Services to ensure it delivers a secure supply of plasma protein and related products to Ontarians. Regarding the shortage, the head of OPSU still says going private is not the answer.
The easy answer to this is to invest in the Canadian Blood Service rather than expand access to a private clinic. When you create a patchwork of private and public collection centers, what you do is lose control of your blood supply.
The Canadian Blood Service refutes that. Quote, to clarify, this plan does not mean Canadian Blood Services is privatizing our operations or giving up control of Canada's blood system. Rather, we are increasing Canadian self-sufficiency in the shortest time possible to reduce our reliance on the global market. Meanwhile, workers in the space feel uneasy with eroding the volunteer donor base.
Why would we take away from that? People are coming from the goodness of their heart to help out. Are we going to lose those people because there's a few dollars that are involved?
And there's this concern.
Once it goes private, there's a lack of oversight. 100%, a lack of oversight and accountability, and pulling the voluntary donor base. It's like 3 really big concerns on this.
The company behind the clinic says Canadians can be assured that the plasma taken locally will be provided locally. The plasma we collect in Whitby and soon in the other Ontario centres will be used to produce life-saving immunoglobulin medicines for patients in Canada. Toronto and Hamilton have come out against these types of clinics, but it's just symbolic. Municipalities have no say whether they can operate. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Whitby.
A major facelift is now underway at BMO Field ahead of next year's World Cup that will include several matches played right here in Toronto. The city and MLSE are investing nearly $150 million in upgrades to the stadium in order to get it up to FIFA World Cup standards. The plans were unveiled at a press conference today. Greg Ross has more.
We are now less than a year and a half away from the first ever World Cup game to be played on Canadian soil. 6 matches will be played at BMO Field, including Canada's opening match.
We will welcome the world to Canada.
The mayor was among those on hand today to help unveil the proposed changes that will need to be made at BMO Field in order to get the stadium up to World Cup standards. First and foremost, the name is going to change during the tournament.
For the purposes of the tournament, will be referenced as Toronto Stadium.
A number of cosmetic changes are already underway at BMO Field, including a few permanent upgrades that are designed to enhance the fan experience at the stadium.
One of the legacy pieces of this renovation will be replacing the single scoreboard that was, until it was taken down, at the north end of the stadium with 4 scoreboards on each of the 4 corners of the stadium, and that will really bring an elevated viewing experience.
More upgrades will be made to the locker room areas and the broadcast facilities. This is all part of the first phase of construction, which is expected to last until August. More upgrades will be made starting next December.
We're now looking at the north end of the stadium where there will be about a 10,000 seating, temporary seating expansion.
An additional 7,000 temporary seats will be added to the south end of the stadium to get the minimum required capacity of 45,000 needed to host a World Cup game. Installation of the temporary seating in both the north and south ends of the building won't begin until after TFC finishes its season. Something else being added to the north end of the stadium, a number of new luxury boxes that will also be permanent.
Here's a pretty good sort of field level view of what will remain on the north end. So you see those 2 levels of hospitality seating.
On top of those luxury boxes will be a rooftop patio area that will be general admission. The city is investing $123 million for the upgrades to BMO Field, while MLSE will kick in another $23 million. The mayor says they are expecting a huge return on that investment.
This event will bring almost $1 billion for Toronto's economy and thousands of jobs.
The total cost to host 6 World Cup games in Toronto is estimated to be around $380 million. The first game will be played in June of 2026. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
Welcome back. Following the Delta crash landing at Toronto Pearson Airport last month, many were praising the calm and professional response by the flight attendants. And that's a huge part of their training. To learn more, Talia Ricci headed up to Fanshawe College in London to check out one of their hands-on exercises.
P. Passenger head count. R. Route for evacuation. O. Operation location of emergency exit.
C.
Commands.
So today you're going to see an example of an evacuation drill, which of course is an integral part of what we do in flight attendant training. I think that that is actually where Fanshawe took it to another level, to say we have the ability to have access to an aircraft, and not just a fuselage, but we actually have access to the aircraft. So in other words, we have the ability to actually evacuate out of a door, out of a window, utilizing emergency equipment such as PBEs, such as life vests, such as first aid kits, fire extinguishers, all the emergency equipment that is necessary to be trained to essentially complete an evacuation.
I may need your help. Will you help me?
You think of what you want in a flight attendant as being exceptionally trained. Each operator has their own training program. So essentially you come from a program such as this, the Flight Services Program, and then go into a ground school with an airline. You are now doing your silent review, which is process. P.
Passenger head count.
R.
Route for evacuation.
O.
Operation location of emergency exits.
C.
Commands.
E.
Evacuation. Sorry. Emergency equipment operation location.
Most commercial operators have a rate of approximately 20 to 40% failure rate within their commercial ground schools, simply because there's so much information to be learned.
Suffered an hydraulics failure.
Okay, are we going to be landing on land or water?
I'll be landing on water.
These students are extremely well prepared. They can go into an interview. They will be successful in an interview. They understand global etiquette, they understand communication, they understand the importance and know how to evacuate an aircraft. They know all of the regulatory compliance that is needed.
Being able to do stuff hands-on and see things just before you're right there working can always be really beneficial to be able to get used to working in such an atmosphere, dressing the part, and also preparing with seeing the equipment and the items that you'll use in the future.
I find these exercises to be extremely helpful. They always talk about how taking this program, it'll prepare us even more for when we do go to our training when we get hired by an airline. I also love the customer service aspect of it as well. Meeting new people, working with new crew each time that you come to work. And I also just didn't want that normal 9-to-5 job.
So after the incident with the Delta crash, there's been a lot of discussion around, first of all, praising the flight attendants and their conduct and how they handled the emergency situation. Was that surprising to you at all, or did you see their training really kick in there?
To be honest, I wasn't surprised, no. I always say flight attendants are trained to do what we hope we never have to.
Everything, drop it. Come on.
They were not planning for an emergency landing or an abnormal landing, and we're definitely not planning on being inverted. However, their training kicks in, and as I said, you are trained to do what you hope you never have to, but you're always prepared.
For people who might have seen that and gotten a little spooked about flying, what would you say to ensure that flying is still a safe means of travel?
You think of the number of flights that take off and land every day, not just in Canada, but globally, and flying is still the safest. What you do need to make sure is that you have well-trained in-flight and that you have operators, for instance, that have Transport Canada approved training programs. Well done, good job. Okay, good job, thank you.
Have some milder temperatures and rain that's coming this week.
Yeah, so I mean, on the surface, that's all very positive, right? That we were getting, you know, the beginning of March to get this kind of weather. It's just when you put that together with the fact that we've had such cold air, all the snowfall, so we get into the snowpack. We have to worry about whether that is actually going to be melting and whether the ground will be able to absorb it. And so there does become this risk to get into some localized flooding, okay? And so that comes up more so for Wednesday than for tomorrow, and I'm going to get into those details. But just speaking about those milder temperatures, kind of looking at the air thickness here, and we could see the area with those colors really pushing and that ridging over the lower Great Lakes. So that's sort of the beginning. We had the first warm front that went in, and tomorrow, or really overnight tonight, the second one goes through. And I'm sure you're noticing that blue, though, over the upper Great Lakes on Wednesday. So that'll be on the doorstep. So yes, things will cool back down by Thursday. But we've got a couple of days where temperatures will be building. So let's not put too much emphasis on that. Let's talk about those building temperatures. We could even get a few embedded thunderstorms in here as the system is pushing through. That's just how mild we're talking about. It's already going to be a high of double digits for southwestern Ontario tomorrow. I've put Windsor up to 10 degrees. We're not going there yet, but we will have that milder air in. But that's why the special weather statement is there. Okay, it's not so much the amount of rain, but that risk that we could get some ice jamming and the melt causing localized flooding. So just looking at this as we go through tonight into the very early morning hours with that front passing through, maybe a few wet flurries mixing with some ice pellets. You could hear that on your rooftops, or if you're out there with the really early morning commuters, could be a little bit of slickness on the roadways. Not much to that. And then we get kind of the next wave tomorrow afternoon, some light showers, and we won't feel that everywhere. This is more widespread though, and this is into Wednesday, and we're going to deal with it much of the day, but I would say in the morning hours is when that morning commute could be kind of the worst for it, for slowing things down, and also some windier conditions then as well. Then on the backside, we'll get into some of those flurries. So as for the amount of rainfall, it's more in that 10 to 20 millimeters for the GTA. A few spots could locally get more towards that 25 millimeters. Tonight, -1. That's why as that front passes, it would be a little bit of mixing or even some ice pellets. 6 is our high for tomorrow, and even warmer on Wednesday as we are headed up to 7 degrees. Wow. And it cools down behind that, Kelda, but not that much.
Yeah, not that much. How things change from last week, right? I like it. Thanks so much, Colette. And that is all the time we have tonight. Have a great night, everyone.